What's up, ego hackers? It's Chase of csjoseph.life. Welcome to season 19, episode 3. And that is how to cognitively develop an ESTP. Which we could see like right here on the green screen, how to cognitively develop ESTP. And we also have, check this out, the symbol for the ESTP, which is the gladiator. Welcome, ESTPs. In this particular lecture, we're going to, or anyone for that matter, we're going to talk about the ESTP archetype according to Jungian analytical psychology, according to Four Sides psychological theory, which is what we at the CSJ community are calling our theory, Four Sides, or Four Sides of the Mind. And we're also going to be discussing, ego hacking, but ultimately this particular lecture is how does an ESTP reach maturity, a higher sense of responsibility, higher sense of humility, higher sense of maturity, and ultimately achieve enlightenment. And that's the goal for ESTPs in this particular lecture. It's awesome. Thank you for joining Season 19, Episode 3. So let's talk about the ESTP archetype. We're going to do a little bit of an intro to kind of familiarize people a little bit more with ESTPs. We haven't talked about ESTPs in a while. They're known as the persuader by most people. But they're also known as the, we'll just write it down here because why not? They're known as the gladiator. And what is the gladiator's purpose? The gladiator, you could say that they actually, because they're TI parent, they actually enjoy debating as much as like my type enjoys debating, from an ENTP standpoint. Although it's not really so much debate from an ESTP standpoint, it's more of like, hey, what's actually true or false, right? They're just trying to be the avatar of truth when it comes to reality as we know it. Why is that? And the reason why is because, and this is something my wife told me, ESTPs are all about checking for the structural integrity in people, basically, as well as systems, rules, and why is that necessary? If you think about it like from a societal standpoint, society, the way it's structured right now, it's like our laws being enforced. I actually was in downtown Sacramento recently before my accident that led to these scars and whatnot that I had some injuries for a while back. I was on a jump bike in downtown Sacramento, and I realized that jump bikes and train tracks don't mix. I do not recommend that. And I bit the dust, or should I say the asphalt, and definitely my ass was sore after that. Among other things. But after, taking that dive there, it's like we ended up running into someone that night who basically got in my face and accused me of breaking the rules. And this person was affiliative. They're all about like, I'm trying to do the right thing, so like I have authority over you to tell you what you have to do, because if you're not doing the right thing, I have every right to tell you what to do because I'm doing the right thing, which is so arrogant of affiliative types to do, but that's very common of affiliate types to do. And this is basically the ESTP struggle. I think ESTPs struggle more with the affiliative or the affiliative in general, or affiliative archetypes, according to the science, more than any other type. Let's be straight. And with that struggle that ESTPs have, it's kind of like, okay, well, why is that? It's because affiliative types, sometimes they have a tendency, like they make the rules, but do they enforce them, or they choose which rules to enforce? For example, let's take the state of California. On average, Californians on the highway speed up to over 15 miles an hour on the road. Speed limit average is 65 miles per hour within the state of California. But when you're on the highway or on the freeway, people are usually going 80 miles an hour on average. And it's because, and this is what we call selective enforcement when it comes to police enforcing the speed laws. Every now and then they do it, but there's so many people, it'd be hard for them to actually really meaningfully enforce it. And I remember first moving to California back when I was in college, or in university, as some would call it. And when I was studying game and simulation programming, like an idiot, and I'm not saying you're an idiot if you're studying game and simulation programming. I'm just saying it was idiotic of me to study game and simulation programming. It was. And I learned that real quick, but luckily I changed my major. But I was told when I first moved to California, hey, cops only pull you over if they think you have drugs in your vehicle. And you know what? I didn't really believe them, but over time, seeing how cops just selectively enforce laws, it's really annoying. And I'm not begging on cops here. There's a lot of people in California. I mean, I get it. But the different and the sheer volume is daunting when you're trying to enforce the law on every single person. But the thing is that can lead to some dirtiness, right? And this is what really triggers ESTPs, because then the police are like, okay, hey, I'm going to enforce, or I think that person is committing a worse crime than speeding, so I'm going to use the excuse of the probable cause of, hey, you're speeding, so I get to pull you over. Then I inspect your vehicle. Then all of a sudden I find drugs, and then it's a worse crime. So I get more attaboys or more kudos for making this a drug bust instead of routine traffic stop, right? Which, quite honestly, is really frustrating to me. It's really frustrating to me that they do that, and because of that, it cheapens the law. It absolutely cheapens the law, and ESTP knows this. Because at the end of the day, whether or not the affiliative, especially affiliative TE users, so basically STJ, NFP Quadra specifically, those types have a problem, a typical issue, with selective enforcement, because they can lazily enforce the law, they can cheaply enforce the law, and they cheapen the law. And it basically creates this culture of law is arbitrary. And ESTPs understand that, people who think that they're doing the right thing and they arrogantly enforce the law, they're hypocrites. And because they're hypocritical, it's like, well, if you're not going to respect the laws that you created by enforcing those laws that you created, I don't have to respect those laws either, right? And so they don't. And it's because they're testing the structural integrity of rules, of laws, as well as people. And if you think about that, why is structural integrity so important? Why is that important? Well, because INFJs, specifically INFJs, let's kind of adjust my position here. So like INFJs, let's go over here and then go over here. So if you look at INFJs, like right here, so INFJs, like the problem that they have is like their virtue and vice, right? Their virtue and vice is all about integrity, which is their virtue, versus corruption. And I'm sorry, selective enforcement, it's a form of corruption. Let's be straight. It's a form of corruption. It's really frustrating, and it's just not going to work. Well, a lot of people don't agree with me on that, but it really is. It's a form of corruption. And it's kind of interesting, the ESTP is what's considered, the polar opposite, of the INFJ. And because they're polar opposites in that regard, they have, and the INFJ is supposed to be producing integrity. And the INFJ is supposed to be the avatar of the affiliative, basically, the tip of the spear, the type that really brings forward the future of humanity and executes and trailblazes that path forward. Well, if the INFJ is not going to do that, then what the hell? If the INFJ is not going to do that, what the hell? This is why the ESTP is polar opposites with them, because the ESTP exists to test the structural integrity of the INFJ. This is why the ESTP is constantly reality checking people, because it's like, hey, I need to make sure that when they're being all affiliative with their little affiliative bias, that those people are following the rules that they created. So they're not being hypocrites. Okay, see, that's another thing. So how do they do structural integrity? It's all about identifying and fighting against, you guessed it, hypocrisy. Because if there is something that absolutely triggers ESTPs, it's hypocrisy. So the purpose of the ESTP, I've said, is to strengthen people, absolutely. Also give them wisdom with their INFJ subconscious. But ultimately, it's to provide structural integrity and weed out hypocrisy. Because if you think about it, when you're strengthening someone, hypocrisy is a sign of weakness. And weeding out that hypocrisy and pruning that hypocrisy from someone makes them more real. It causes them to have a higher sense of character, right? And that sense of character is so necessary and it's so important. And that's just basically that is the purpose of the ESTP. And it goes further than that, but then they also have their own form of hypocrisy as well. And it comes out, virtue versus vice. Granted, ESTPs struggle with instant gratification in as much as ESFPs struggle with instant gratification from a vice standpoint. The difference is it's more of a problem with ESFPs because they have the FI parent self-aggrandizement or selfishness component to it that ESTPs don't necessarily have, right? Well, that's an issue. That's a problem. So based on that, ESTPs then, their version of vice is a little bit different. And it's because if you look at it here, on the whiteboard, let's see. I'm actually going to move this way to see. I'm actually going to get a better chair set up next time. And also my chair creak is like terrible. Ugh, this is really gross. I need to get a new chair. I will get a new chair soon, as soon as I can afford to. So like take SE here, right? So you have, oops, hold on. Let's actually get this here. So you have SE. So you have SE hero, then you have FE child. Okay. So SE hero and FE child. They're trying to have as many shared experiences as possible. Shared experiences is everything. And don't forget, folks, that the reason why they have instant gratification as a vice, it's like a sub-vice. It's not their main vice. Remember, ESTPs live so much in the moment that they're not exactly actually cognitively aware of the passage of time or time passing. They're just not aware of time passing. They're the people that look up and realize that 4 hours have passed on the clock and they had no idea where the time even went, right? They're just not aware. They're so much in the moment, they lack that awareness entirely, and that's because their memory is basically, if they're by themselves focused on something, the time just goes out the window. But if they're with other people, those people become totems. They see people reacting to time passing, then they're aware that time is passing, right? It always requires another person. This is why ESTPs, it's just one example as to why, as the SE hero, they just cannot be alone. Aloneness scares them. Being alone is super freaky. And then there's FE child. They're constantly trying to have that concrete shared experience, that co-sensual, we'll call it co-sensual experience with others. And then they do it with FE child because they're drawing their self-worth like a feeling vampire on other people. So from a virtue and vice standpoint, this leads to the virtue or the vice of nymphomania, which is like, man whoring, for example, or chastity. And chastity doesn't mean like not having any sexual activity whatsoever. Chastity is meaning you're having sexual activity with like one person and you're and dedicated to that one person instead of, seeking shared experience after shared experience after shared experience. Why does this happen? Well, that happens because of anti-inferior. Anti-inferior is all about freedom of choice. If you take away choice from an ESTP, they literally, like everything will just explode. Like it's world ending. The reason why is because the NE demon comes out and then everyone has no future, because if you take away the choice, no one has a choice, for example. And we see this typically all the time, from an NI standpoint. I regret that my cursor is not seeable on the lecture thing. But NI inferior, it's freedom of choice. It's like, hey, I want to give these people good experiences. I want to have these shared experiences with them. And that's where that comes from. So, when they're chased, it's really special because they're saying, I choose you. They're saying, I want you. And they know what they want, because oftentimes ESTPs don't know what they want. And when they're actually choosing one person, it's a big deal, right? And that's very typical, and that's where all of a sudden they find themselves in a situation where they're actually being more chased instead of being nymphomania. Because think about it this way: NI inferior, when it's trying to like develop a sense of when it's becoming wiser within its gateway, because this is the gateway function, it's the fourth gateway, etc. When it's becoming wiser from that standpoint, It's very important because sometimes ESTPs look at life, it's like, well, if I become more responsible, that takes away my choice. And oftentimes, ESTPs end up having that really bad relationship with responsibility in that regard because they view responsibilities as something that takes away their freedom, their personal freedom. So sometimes they end up having the attitude of, well, I am choosing to not be responsible with that yet. I'll be responsible with that later. It's kind of like an interesting form of INJ procrastination with their INJ subconscious or INFJ subconscious because they're like, well, I don't have to be responsible with that right now. I don't want to be responsible with that right now. I'll be more responsible with that later. I'll put off later in my life to have choices taken away from me. Here's a great example of that. ESTP women, arguably, statistically speaking, are more likely than any other type to experience postpartum depression, specifically because they inevitably, in general, again, this is statistically, in general, view their child, their baby, basically, as the number one reason why their freedom of choice is being taken away. And then it's like, wow, I just had this huge responsibility foisted upon me that now I don't have any choice anymore, and then they get super depressed about it, right? They didn't necessarily know what they were getting into. This is why when I'm encouraging like ESTP mothers, for example, or ESTP women, make sure that it is definitely what you want and it is within the timing, and you're in a situation where you're not having like too many obligations or other responsibilities like working, for example, like working a full-time job while also being a full-time mother, and if you're married and a full-time wife, etc. That's just absolutely ridiculous. And quite frankly, the women can't really handle that, in our society. And this is why marriages end up suffering and relationships end up suffering in that regard, because it's like, okay, we're actually expecting people, especially women, for performing so many roles in the home. It especially sucks because then the ESTP is aware of our bullshit monetary system, because they also see our monetary system as arbitrary because fiat currency is not concrete, not real to them, like because their SE hero basically, the SE hero basically states that, hey, is there actually any intrinsic value in my paper money right now? No, it's only because everyone's collective opinion is that the money has value, and that opinion can change. And if the collective opinion changes tomorrow about my paper money, then I guess that means my paper money is valueless, and that scares the hell out of the ESTP. And then the ESTP is like, okay, then why would I want to work so hard my entire life to gain paper money that has no actual intrinsic value anyway? There's nothing concrete about it. Did I just get completely screwed by the rest of society? Wait a minute, they're checking for that freaking structural integrity, right? So, oh yeah, another reason why I need to rebel. It's kind of interesting, Samuel Adams, the leader of the terrorist organization known as the Sons of Liberty, who are responsible for the Boston Tea Party and potentially the shot heard around the world, as well as potentially the Boston Massacre in some cases, which sparked the American Revolution. Yeah, Samuel Adams, he's an ESTP because he saw the bullshit taxations or tax stamps that they're putting on American goods from the qualities, no taxation without representation. He saw that as a whole bullshit, arbitrary system. How dare King George think he has some kind of divine right to tell us what to do? He doesn't even live out here. He doesn't even live in the colonies. Okay, we need to be independent. Very pragmatic approach, right? And it's the same thing with ESTPs. So they're able to gain their virtue of chastity because chastity is a form, an ultimate form of responsibility. And because they're being devoted to that one person instead of multiple people, or having too many, shallow relationships, and STPs do this, and sometimes SFPs do this, but mostly STPs do this, where it's like, yeah, and by the way, STPs, I'm like totally calling you out right now. It's like, if I don't have the title of boyfriend or girlfriend or wife or husband or committed, then that means, if I have another opportunity to have a sexual fling with somebody, or maybe be the other woman or the other man, to help someone cheat on their woman or their man or their intimate lover or their their spouse or their boyfriend, girlfriend, or whoever they're in a relationship with, and I'm the other woman or man in that situation, and I'm facilitating the cheating, etc. Wow, hypocrites! You're actually contributing to the problem. I thought you're supposed to be that person that's like not, that's pointing out hypocrisy. But it's like, well, hey, I'm not committed, so I get to have shallow relationships right now and just be a nymphomaniac because I'm drawing my self-worth based on how many sensual relationships I can have. Because it's not like I'm being given a choice anyway. The society is stacked up against me, so and everyone else is doing it, right? Everyone else, SE hero, like everyone else, SE hero. Because everyone else is doing it, then why bother? Why shouldn't I do it? Why do I not get the choice if everyone else is doing it, right? And it's like, okay, where's the structural integrity? Do you guys understand where we're going with this, with structural integrity and why it's so important? And it comes out with their virtue and vice, right? So the thing is that ESTPs ultimately, when they're getting the path to enlightenment, they have to have a different relationship with responsibility, and we're going to get into that in a minute. So, but let's talk about their communication style. So their communication style is that they are direct, initiating, and control. And what does that mean? Direct means is that they choose their role in the conversation. They're also triple direct. The reason why is because when you're looking at the three sides of the mind here, you got the ego, you have the subconscious, you have the unconscious, etc. And then obviously the superego is the four sides. But each of them have their own communication style. You have direct, initiating, control. You have direct responding movement here, as well as informative, initiating movement. Each of them has their own communication style with which they go. And direct means that they're triple direct. Why? Well, guess what? ICJs are direct. INFJs are direct. ESTPs are direct. So they are triple direct. So they're very direct. Which means if an ESTP is being informed with you, that basically means that their, superego, source of their sin nature or human condition is out, and you probably should be paying real attention to that. Well, I mean, that's a serious problem. They're probably going to gladiate you down. They're going to take away your future because you're taking away their choice, taking away their freedom, right? Just like, Samuel Adams did. Definitely took away King George's choice to do with whatever he wanted with the colonies, because King George was taking away Samuel Adams' choice to participate in the bullshit tax stamps that were being levied against the colonies in those days. And I'm just using the basic no taxation before representation. There's so many other reasons for the Revolutionary War that goes beyond that. But anyway, the communication styles, they're very direct. So they say what they mean what they say, they choose their role in the conversation. They are very directive and somewhat commanding, which means they're very direct. Versus people who are informative, who are actually beating around the bush and being indirect, right? That's a very good way of saying it. They're also very initiating. They go to other people or they initiate additional points. They don't choose to prefer the role of responder. They let other people respond to them, etc. And they're very control, which means they are outcome focused. Everything is all about results and outcomes versus someone who's movement, who's more process oriented. They like to have a master process or way of doing things to solve every issue, whereas an ESTP creates an individual process per issue because they're very outcome focused as a result of being in control. It causes them to be slower, but because they're slower, they have a higher chance of getting a better outcome than movement types. Movement types can achieve things faster, but the quality may not be as good. Whereas the ESTP achieves things slower, but the quality would be higher, right? Again, this is like, the tortoise versus the hare. The tortoise is definitely control. The hare is movement. Which one wins the race, right? Ultimately, it's the tortoise because there's more effort and there's more hard work in it. So if we're going to compare an ESTP to an ENTP, results-wise, the ESTP in general is probably going to be more successful with higher quality. But so long as the ENTP doesn't give up, they can keep doing things over and over and over and over again to perfect things over time. So there's give and take there from a direct initiative and control standpoint. Their disposition, aka their temperament, is freedom-based creators, SPs, aka the artisan. The artisan is all about living in the moment, being creative, but it's all about freedom and freedom of choice. Freedom of choice is absolutely everything to the ESTP. But anyway, So let's talk about cognitive functions because, hashtag outline cognitive functions. Cognitive functions wise, their hero is extroverted sensing, living in the moment, being the ultimate realist, manipulating the physical environment or anything physical for that matter. It's very physics oriented. TI parent, very responsible with what it knows, very responsible with logic. FE child, very child, innocent, divine with its caring for other people. Most people assume ESTPs are bullies or dicks when the reality situation is they're actually some of the most caring of all the types. They just realize that a lot of people are fake. And because of the hypocrisy that the ESTP is able to identify when checking the structural integrity or the character of other human beings, if an ESTP sees that someone having bad character, they know they're a hypocrite and they don't know that that person lacks integrity, which means, hey, you lack integrity, which means you're not consistent, which means I can't trust you, which means I don't want to mirror you because STP NFJ Quadro is mirrors, which means you are the weakest link. Goodbye. So, like, seriously, goodbye. So they're not going to have anything to do with them. And, which is also very important. And then we talked about introverted intuition inferior already, which is it's all about its freedom of choice and what it wants to do. And then when it actually does know what it wants to do, instead of being afraid of what it wants to do, but when it actually aspires and knows what it wants, well, guess what that's going to do? They should go for it when they absolutely know and then stop at nothing to get it. But when that happens, all the doors open for them to make that happen. It's almost like they have liquid luck that they could just activate. Where it's more active, I'd say, when it becomes active. Whereas like the liquid luck of NI child kind of can be a little, while it is an active function, it can be a little bit more passive over time when compared to the power of an aspirational function. And remember, folks, the hero is the first gateway. It is the apex of the conscious mind, whereas the inferior is the fourth function, the second gateway, and then the villain. We're going to be changing the word nemesis to villain. I think villain is more accurate in describing it as a cognitive attitude because it's either villain or it's ally. It exists to challenge the hero, and we talk about this a lot in season 16, episode 7, which I recommend you guys have checked out. And if you're patrons, you probably likely have checked that out. It basically exists it's where a person's worry exists. And then we have the TE critic, where a person's wisdom exists. And the TE critic causes the ESTP to really understand how much statistics and rules are just absolutely arbitrary, or people's belief systems, because, like, for example, we talk about the world's monetary system and fiat currency. The ESTP maintains that fiat currency itself is a belief system and subject to change on a whim, which makes the ESTP not cool with it. And then there's obviously FI trickster, and FI trickster gets to a point where it's like, okay, hey, from an FI trickster standpoint, yes, it causes the ESTP to be amoral, not immoral. Amoral meaning lacking morals or lacking moral judgment, such that it's like they don't know what is a good thing or a bad thing per se. So that's just something to be aware of, as a result of that. So. And then expert intuition demon, which comes out, when their choice is being taken away. So the demon activates through cognitive orbit, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, hey, you took away my choice. Now no one gets a choice until I get a choice, basically, which is exactly what Samuel Adams did for the Sons of Liberty during the American Revolution. Also, with disposition, I forgot to touch on it. They're very concrete. So they're all focused on what's actually real. This is why the ESTP is the ultimate realist, because they're aware of what people value with their FE child. They're seeking truth with TI parent, but they're also aware of the realism through the physical reality set before them with extroverted sensing hero, which means they are the ultimate realist, and they are basically the highest definition of concrete expression out there, with the exception of maybe the ISTJ on the other side, as per their golden pair, in terms of what's real, etc. That being said, the other part of their disposition is that they're very pragmatic, and they represent something that could actually provide chaos to the order set to the affiliative, because the affiliative is more orderly, whereas the pragmatic, because it's independent, can be more chaotic, but it's really exists to test the affiliative. And their being pragmatic comes from their NI inferior, where they have that need for the freedom of choice, as a result of that, because no one should be able to take away their choice. They value freedom of choice more than anything and everything. And then beyond that, they're interest-based instead of being systematic. And folks, what is the difference between systematic and interest? Well, look at it this way: systematic people are all about finding. They're all about finding those things where it's like, okay, they're all about finding the best way to do something, the best methodology, the best way to do something. Whereas an interest-based person is all about, I'm trying to find the best way for me. What do I get out of this situation? Or what does that person get out of the situation? That person is trying to find what's best for them getting out of it. I'm trying to get out of that same situation what's best for me. So how about we just create a win-win here, right? That's the difference. That's interest-based, right? A lot of people don't really know that, so I'm going to be expounding a little bit further in future lectures about how systematic is the best way of doing something, etc., versus, systematic versus, interest-based, just so that people understand, why that interest is there. And the ultimate form of interest-based is creating a win-win situation. And ESTPs are consistently trying to seek that out on a regular basis. And it really frustrates them when they can't, because they feel guilty when win-lose situations, even if they don't like it when they lose, but they also feel bad if they're the only winner, which is why ESTPs, because they're interest-based, has to have that win-win, right? ISTPs also have that same need as well. So, but anyway, and now we're getting into the 4 sides of the mind. It's about 37 minutes in, and we've gotten like the foundation laid at this point for this lecture. And we talked a lot about structural integrity. So here's the meat and the potatoes for this particular lecture for season 19, episode 3. And so 4 sides of the mind. You have your ego, your subconscious, your unconscious, your superego. Obviously, it's the 4 sides. It's what makes us unique more than anybody else. And it comes. The concept of the 4 sides of the mind comes from inverse theory, something called inverse theory. But inverse theory was not entirely fleshed out. And inverse theory is, okay, so if you take the cognitive stack, of the ego, basically, you just flip it on its head, and all of a sudden you have the subconscious. It's the same thing when it comes to the unconscious, and you just flip it on its head, and it's the superego, right? That's inverse theory, and that's where we get the 4 sides of the mind, ultimately. But when inverse theory was first presented to me, it was only with the concept that there was only actually 3 sides of the mind, as more of a kind of more fit Freud's model. But the reality of the situation is that that's not the case. There's 4 sides of the mind. I understand that people want to use the Freud model, or people wanted to use more of the traditional Jung model, or even people wanted to compare the human psyche to the Holy Trinity of Judeo-Christian lore, etc. I get that, but that's not actually what it's about. Now, when we talk about the 4 sides, in order for someone to reach enlightenment, you have to reach something known as integration. And we talked about this in episode 2 for the ESTJs. It's all about integration. Integration is everything, because if you're not integrated, then you're living a life out of balance. And with you being out of balance, it's like, okay, great, what are we doing here? And you really also have to look at it like this guy on the Discord server recently, his name's Reaper, he posted a Avatar The Last Airbender video where Aang, the main character of the story, was being taught about how to open up his chakras and go through the 7 gateways of the different chakras. And I find that very, very interesting, because it's like the cognitive functions themselves are our different chakras, and being able to move between the different cognitive functions and go through the 4 gateways to change the cognitive functions really gives a whole new meaning to the psyche. And it's like, well, wait a minute, maybe there is actually something to the 7 chakras, because I can actually see that right here within the cognitive functions. Because remember, the hero function is given to us by default, but we still have the responsibility of developing the rest of our function stack all the way down, and then ultimately the 4 sides of the mind. So with the path to enlightenment, you have to find yourself, okay, hey, I need to integrate. And the reason why is because, this is where you get people who are disjointed, or they're lacking in character, or as the ESTP in the book of James, because James is an ESTP in the Bible, he would say, if anyone who asks for wisdom but doesn't have faith, or doesn't believe that he'd receive it, or is just being like fair-weathered about it, he's a double-minded man. Who's being tossed back and forth in the waves. And this is an ESTP talking, okay, saying that someone else is being double-minded. Oh, wait, guess what? He's pointing out hypocrisy, folks. He's pointing out hypocrisy, looking for that structural integrity amongst those Christians, in quotes. Yeah, Christians in quotes. Thank you, guys. Thanks. But yeah, he's looking for that structural integrity. And it's like, where's your integrity if you're so double-minded, because it's just not going to work. And the reason why people are double-minded, guess what? It's because their 4 sides of the mind are, well, disarray. It's chaos within the soul of mankind, and we have the responsibility of integrating it and bringing our souls into an order. Now, while they already have an order about them, we need to bring it together to reach a higher level of order, because guess what? Order begets order, right? So we have to reach that level of integration in order to reach enlightenment, because one cannot reach an enlightenment until all 4 sides of the mind have been developed and integrated, so at last the soul, the mind, is balanced within the human being. Because you can't do that because if you're trying to master the superego, like what we talked about, so here's the superego. If you try to master the superego before it's time, and you're just being super expedient, right? Oh, I'm Mr. Expedient. Nope. Now I'm in the superego, and then all of a sudden the world explodes. That's really helpful. That's the expedient way. But if you look at it from a standpoint of, okay, hey, I'm just trying to develop, I'm trying to actually gain development of the superego. Oh, that's a whole nother story. Now, I had just finished that 2.5-hour lecture, what is the superego? I haven't released any lectures since because it was really big and I really wanted to sink in within the audience and whatnot. But ultimately, that's just the wrong direction it went in. So willpower, ethics, logic, physics, all these cognitive functions, while they have their own unique identities, they're also part of a much larger complex system, and we see that consistently with the 4 sides of the mind. And you have to integrate, you have to reach mastery of the ego, the subconscious, and the unconscious, so that once you have all 3, you're able to go for that superego and get your hooks in to be able to develop that superego. It's absolutely critical, because otherwise, if you just go straight to the superego, from the ego to the superego, you're making that deal with the devil, as we explained in season 17. And it's like the self bending in upon the self, basically, which is causing a lot of problems. And it's the same thing with ESTPs, to the point where ESTPs, it's like, wow, I've never had any choice, no one's going to get a choice. Or it's like, why would I choose to be a part of this bullshit, arbitrary, affiliative system that never actually benefits me, and when I actually try to participate, I get punished for it? You guys realize how much the education system is completely stacked against ESTPs? Oh, and INFJs, by the way, because they have the same problem, and it just makes the INFJs even more emo about it than the ESTPs. At least the ESTPs can tough their way through it for the most part. And yes, the INFJ could as well, but it's even harder on the INFJ. And it's like STP, NFJ Quadra, they end up getting completely screwed up. This is why when I coach STP, NFJ Quadra, I tell them to avoid academics. Yes, that's right. I actually tell STP, NFJ Quadra to avoid academics. And I tell them to do one of 2 things. Become an apprentice of some kind and pick up a skill, right? Like they become an apprentice and they become a journeyman, etc., and then they become a master, right? That whole apprenticeship system, and they can pick up a trade skill, like be an electrician or an auto mechanic, right? Or a bartender, for example. These are all basically trade skills, or construction, right? Trade skills. It's a trade, right? And these things matter. I tell them to stay away from academics, and then become an apprentice, or the other option is to become an autodidact. And my ESTP mentor, he was an autodidact. He was an amazing autodidact. Because you know what he did? He learned the every single inch of a submarine. Not because the military was telling him he had to. He did it because he wanted to be the smartest guy on the boat. And he was. He was the smartest guy. I wonder he was motivated to become the smartest guy on the boat, because he literally was the smartest guy on the boat. Every single person could come to him for every single aspect of his boat as a submariner. Everyone knew he was the top engineer. Everyone knew he had the highest test score. Everyone knew he was the man. And he did that because he studied his ass off. Because guess what? STP, NFJ Quadra, if they actually want to learn something, they will master it. It's one of the reasons why the ISTP is known as the jack of all trades, master of none, because the ISTP just learns the skill and they get what they want out of it and they move on to the next one. So they don't exactly really achieve mastery with it. Whereas like INFJs or ESTPs, they can achieve mastery on it because they want to achieve mastery on it, because they take that skill and that skill becomes part of their identity, right? Where the ISTP, it's not part of their identity. And it's the same with ENFJs. It's not part of their identity either. Because ENFJs, it's not about mastering skills. They're mastering skills for the sake of helping other people. Whereas the ISTPs mastering skills for the sake of just doing what works and getting to move on to the next thing. ESTPs, INFJs, however, they master the skill because it becomes part of their identity. And he identified as a submariner, as the most badass engineer on his boat, and he made a point to do that. Because here's the thing. He's like, if I have to follow the bullshit, authority, affiliative, SJ society that is the Navy and follow all their rules, I can break whatever rules I want to. Do you know why? Because everyone is depending on me for the operation of this boat, which means I get a lot more freedom if I'm the one that controls all the knowledge. If I'm the one that has all the knowledge and all the wisdom as to how this boat operates as the best mechanic, and I know every inch of this boat, well, guess what? That gives me more freedom to do what I want. What are they going to do? What are they going to do? Tell me to get off the boat? What are they going to do? What are they going to do? I mean, God bless my ESTP mentor. Funny guy. Somehow, he figured out a way to cope with that by being the most badass engineer on the boat, because he knew that by being smarter than everyone else, that would give him a lot more freedom. And kudos to him, he figured it out. And because of that, he got pretty brilliant. And then he learned this science, and then he started teaching me, so fair enough. That's pretty cool. Kudos to my ESTP mentor, Mr. Robert Bryant. So yeah, path to enlightenment. It's all about integration and integrating the four sides of the mind. Now, we do this through cognitive by basically using our minds. We use our minds, and remember, the ego exists basically. Like, what is the number one product of the ego? Like, so let's say we're developing our four sides of the mind. What is the number one product, right? The product of the ego is basically responsibility. When the parent function in the ego is developed, because remember, folks, when you're developing your functions, what's the order that they develop first? The hero function is first, okay? Then it's the child. No, Mr. CSJ, what about the auxiliary function? It also knows what you call the parent function. And Dr. John Beebe. Maybe you guys should look up energies and patterns of psychological type. One of the sources with which my source material is, oh, Mr. CSJ, you must be TE Hero because, you're citing your sources. No. Actually, I have TE Critic, which has some semblance of wisdom, and I realize it's wise to cite sources for all you, STJ, NFP Quadra folks out there who are too busy asking me to cite my sources while simultaneously potentially being too lazy to cite your own. And, I have to, be wise and cite my sources for y'all's sake. You know what I'm saying? Like, as I like pretend to be a Submariner Texan at the same time. Yeah, definitely not going there. So anyway, just understand, like, the auxiliary function, and I got it right here as part of the outline, auxiliary function development. You have to understand, it's like the parent function is the last one to develop, because your inferior function, your insecurity, still comes first. A person who is immature in their ego is someone who has not developed their parent function. This is why you end up having what's called hero-child loops. Hero-child loops are a thing. Everyone keeps telling me, oh, Mr. C.S. Joseph, you gotta go watch that guy, Dave's Superpowers, because he talks about hero and child loops. Yes, hero-child loops are a thing. I knew they were a thing even without Dave's Superpowers, because it's pretty obvious that's a thing. Why is that happening? It's because people's parent functions develop last. And because of that, there's no parent to parent the child. So the parent gets to go hang out with the hero anytime it wants. And it's literally playtime at all times, which is a sign of immaturity. What happens when FE child of an ESTP is being immature? It becomes overly giving, and it keeps giving, and it's hanging out with the hero, like, ooh, I'm going to give this person a good experience, and they're going to be loyal to me, and I'm going to make them feel good at the same time, so I get double for my trouble, right? And they're going to be loyal to me, and they're going to love me, and give me recognition, and they're never going to abandon me. Yeah. Psych. That's not how it works. Well, they learn that. And after learning that, after being abandoned, after being taken advantage of and doormatted because they have FE child, well, guess what? As a hero realizes that they need to be checking the structural integrity of things. And that's where TI parent comes in. What's the structural integrity? This is what I use to measure. It's my litmus test. It's how I measure the character of other people, right? All of a sudden, the TI parent is developed, and guess what? We have a responsible ego, and the sense of responsibility begins with the ESTP. This is why, you know, when you have ESTPs out there who are saying, like, oh, I'll be responsible for this tomorrow because if I'm responsible for this now, it's going to get in the way of my freedom of choice. And it's like, no, if I'm harming myself by mirroring people with poor character, maybe I should be more responsible so I'm not mirroring more people with bad character and then end up becoming a person with good character, because I don't want to wake up 40 years old one day, because then I inferior is aware of that risk. I don't want to wake up 40 years old one day realizing I mirrored the wrong people. Yeah, that's a thing. And that's why the parent function is developed, okay? And then when that happens, guess what? Then you have a developed ego, because you have them all. And then obviously it's time, okay, to enter the second gateway. The hero is the gateway to the ego. We've already developed the ego as our development cycle for the ego. And then we enter the second gateway. And we can enter in the gateway in two ways, as we pointed out in Season 17. We have a chaotic transition or an orderly transition. If you're going through your inferior function, like with a, chaotically, you're going to be always super insecure, emo, INFJ, subconscious. You're so emo, you're so depressed. Why do I bother doing the good thing? Why do I bother doing the right thing? I'm just going to go basically screw anything that moves and have as many meaningless sexual relationships with as many people as I can get my hands on, because that's how I'm going to draw my self-worth. That's going to be part of my identity. That's going to be who I am, because I don't care. Because why? Obviously, no one else values me, so why should I value myself, right? And then it just turns into this endless cycle. That's what happens when it's a chaotic transition into the subconscious INFJ of the ESTP. That's literally what happens, folks. That's why it's happening, okay? So how do you solve that problem? Well, by doing an orderly transition. And what's an orderly transition? It's the one that takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of practice. And that's when you turn the inferior function into an aspirational function, where they're no longer insecure about what they want, where the ESTP actually knows what they want. And their NI becomes so powerful as an aspirational function that it's even more powerful than standard NI hero as a gateway function. It's like they've unlocked a chakra, basically, by going into their subconscious and having INFJ subconscious orderly INFJ subconscious, where the ESTP becomes the great sage on the mountain, where they wield the greatest knowledge and wisdom this world has ever seen, such that the ESTP can confer this wisdom upon anyone and strengthen them through reality checks, through showing, by mirroring somebody else's really bad character and be like, and then like, oh, you have bad character right now, right? See how it feels? See how you're making everyone feel? You're treating everyone this way? Well, I'm going to treat you that way too, right? Because your bad behavior gives me license to show you exactly how you're behaving right now. That's what my ESTP mentor would always tell me. By the way, I'm not advocating for other people's bad behavior gives me license to behave badly. It's all about what the intention is in that regard. What is the result, actually? It's all about the result, not the intention, because the road to hell is paved with intention. It's about what is the outcome. The outcome is the ESTP using their orderly INFJ sage of the mountain, their paladin, basically, because this is a gladiator turning into a paladin that is going before other people, using the fiery sword of truth of TI parent and burning away the lies, burning away the hypocrisy of other people, making them stronger as a result. And because they have all that wisdom, they have humility, and it gains them humility. How is that possible? Well, because if you think about it, FE child, it's a child, right? But when you go into with an orderly transition through the second gateway and get into the paladin of the INFJ subconscious, if you notice, these functions have turned around, and then FE is no longer a child. It's no longer a child. And the TI parent, it's like they get to be a kid again. It's like they get to experience youth all over again. Wait a minute. The fountain of youth is in the subconscious, folks. Why else do you think the subconscious makes people the happiest? Yeah, might want to pay attention to that. Just saying. So TI all of a sudden is a child function right now. And FE right here, guess what, folks? It's a parent function. Wait a minute. FE is more responsible. Wait a minute. And then as a result of that, because it's more responsible, this develops humility, where humility becomes the final product of the subconscious. The paladin uses the fiery sword of truth in humility. Why? Because it's a double-edged sword. When they're cutting people down with their truth, it's cutting them at the same time because they know of the hypocrisy. The ESTP does not ever want to be a hypocrite because they're the type responsible for exposing the hypocrites. What a world we'd live in if the ESTPs were hypocrites. Wait a minute. Yeah, that's really nice. Stop being hypocrites, guys. Because if you don't, you're going to make me uncomfortable. And then you won't be comfortable. Yeah, that's what's going to happen, guys. Don't do that. So, we've already developed a parent function, and we've reached a high level of responsibility. And we've already developed our new auxiliary function, which is the parent function of the INFJ Paladin subconscious, an orderly transaction, and we have developed a sense of humility. So we have humility active after going through these chakras, etc., and then we have responsibility active. Then, and sometimes, by the way, folks, usually some people don't develop the subconscious until later. I kind of did that out of order. Usually the subconscious is the third side of the mind, or it's, even though it's up here, it's the side of the mind that's actually usually developed third. The ego is first, then the unconscious is second, and then the subconscious. That's actually very typical in cognitive development. However, based on people's nurtures, that changes. What you have cognitive focus. I met an ISTJ today. He's ESTP focused, so he's very shadow focused, and he just really hasn't really developed his ego as much. He's got his subconscious. His subconscious is is decently developed, and his unconscious is really developed. His unconscious, his shadow is super mega developed for an ISTJ. He's still working on his ego, because he's still toying with, his identity and how important his identity is. But what is the thing that I should tack my identity onto. He's still trying to find his identity, and that's what the ego is all about. It's all about identity. But if one cannot really come to understand their identity until after they develop their responsible nature of developing their parent function within the ego. And this is causing his hero and his child function to reign and do whatever they want and get into trouble without the parent there to put both of them in check. Because the parent keeps the child in check by being a parent and parenting the child, but the parent also holds the hero accountable, telling the hero, hey, I get that you're flying around saving the world here, but you're harming the children because the collateral damage is a poor example to the children. You probably should stop. And then the hero's like, oh yeah, I should probably be like an actual hero instead of like a selfish douchebag. Maybe I should actually conduct myself with character. Oh yeah, that's useful, right? So then the unconscious, right? Now again, typically people in their life, they develop their ego first, and then they go into their unconscious, and then they develop their subconscious in midlife. And oftentimes, especially in coaching with coaching clients, I'm telling them, hey, if you don't start developing your inferior function now, because sometimes people save their inferior function for last in their development. I'm one of those people. I actually saved that gateway for last. The first gateway I actually developed. I started developing my ego, my hero, and whatnot. And but then I actually went straight down to my unconscious, and then I started developing my critic, my TE critic. This is why you have people like some of my critics on YouTube right now saying that I'm an ENTJ or an ENFP instead of an ENTP, because I use TE a lot, and it's because I have developed INTJ unconscious, INTJ shadow, etc. And that's very important. So so TE critic, it becomes very developed within the ESTP after developing their unconscious. Well, how is that done? That's done by going into the third gateway, which is the villain function, and you can do it in an orderly or chaotic way. If it's chaotic, because the unconscious's final product is actually maturity, it's actually wisdom, but a person derives happiness from the subconscious, but they derive their maturity, not responsibility, that's up here with the parent, etc., but their maturity. And I know I have conflicting terms, but I'm actually, I got the system down where the terms are where they're supposed to be, so I'm using the correct one now. So sorry for being confusing or seeming inconsistent. I'm just trying to develop the terminology and define them properly. If you notice, we've been changing a few words here and there, and that's all because that's all because of that. But if you look at right here, I'm like looking away so I can actually see what I'm doing here. But if you look at right here, you have TE critic, and when you're going through the SI villain function, basically, you need to turn it into an ally. And you do that by having an orderly transition into the unconscious side of the mind. Well, how is that even possible? People do it mostly chaotically. It's because they're very worried they're getting over their concerns. And ESTPs worry about their comfort. They spend all day long making everybody else comfortable with their SE hero, but for them, they need to have a healthy reset, a nice little reset button where they reset who they are. Hey, I need to take a few moments to get comfortable real quick, so then I can go back to making everyone else comfortable. And they don't need much. They really don't need that much. But SI users need to realize that you can't be like super selfish. You can't be selfish and not be comforting to other people when they've been making you comfortable all day long. It's not fair. It's actually double standard, and it's selfish if SI users do it. That's how SI selfishness comes out. And it's also, this function also has a tendency of causing the ESTP of being disloyal. But guess what? They're only as loyal as other people are loyal to them because of SE Hero. So SE Hero sees other people being loyal. Oh, I'm going to mirror you, so I too will become loyal, right? And they're no longer worried about being disloyal at that point. It's also where their nostalgia comes out. They have some serious nostalgia because they're worried that their past is better than, is going to be better with their future. Or they're worried that they don't have enough experiences to tell really cool stories to other people, because SE Hero wants to be able to tell stories and good experiences to other people. So they do a lot of research for their ISTJ unconscious, looking at memes or funny stories to give people experiences that way, and they keep looking up new ones to keep their mind fresh of all those new memories so that they can use them as ammunition or cards to play when they meet new people to potentially help them identify people who will become loyal to them or who may actually be real friends, or use it as tests of character or integrity or structural integrity. And this is why what causes STPs or especially ESTPs to take risks at times, because with those risks, they're like, hey, I'm going to go do this thing, so I end up having a story so I could tell my friends that I did this, because they'll become more loyal to me because they'll be like, okay, what are they going to do next, right? That's where that comes from. They're worried about that. So when they're being an orderly transition, well, it becomes an ally, and instead of challenging the hero and being like, because the villain is telling the hero function like, hey, we don't have enough experiences, we don't have enough life experience, we're not doing new things, and because of that, we're going to be worthless, and we need to stay useful, we need to stay relevant. The ESTP has constant pressure on them to be relevant all the time, and they're like, if I don't keep up with what's going on, I'm going to become irrelevant, which means no one's going to value me because they're all going to feel that I'm worthless, basically, and I'm not useful to them. And then they're all going to abandon me. And they're not going to give me any attention that I so desperately crave. And then, because of that, I'm going to lose my freedom of choice, which is what they're afraid of the most. All because they're not taking the time to give themselves those additional memories. But then they realize that, okay, in order for me to do that, maybe I should become more responsible as a person in general so that I am always guaranteeing my ability to create additional memories, to create additional stories or experiences that I can deliver to other people, to ingratiate myself with them, to create loyalty within them, to create character and strength within them, to build my INFJ paladin subconscious more so my subconscious can share wisdom with them so I can become a happier and better person overall. And this SI villain's like, hey, you better be putting in your time. You better be paying your dues. But then the FE child's like, well, I don't want to be responsible with that right now. That's going to take away my freedom of choice. But then the SI villain is telling the hero, okay, if you have your freedom of choice now, if you get your instant gratification now, you're not going to have instant gratification later. You want to use up all your choices in life right now? Go ahead. But you won't have any choices later. See, that's the lesson of the SI villain function. And that's how the SI villain needs to become the ally. And the ally to the ESTP ego is when the ISTJ villain is at a point where it's like, hey, I'm going to become more responsible so that I end up having more choices and more experiences later. And this is really, really important. This is kind of like an example of making necessary sacrifices for the sake of the future or for the sake of freedom, basically. Where the story of Cain and Abel, or people making sacrifices to God, like in early times in the Bible, like the Israelites making sacrifices, blood sacrifices. Or as Jordan Peterson put out, do what is meaningful versus what is expedient. Because if the ESTP is all about using up all of those choices right now and not spending any time to invest in their future and become more responsible and invest in who they are, and without that investment, well, guess what? They're taking away their own future, right? Because there's no solid ground with which they could stand on. And guess what? Introverted sensing is the earth function. It's all about solid ground. It's all about terra firma. So they have to force themselves to come to terms with the fact that I need to be more responsible. And then oftentimes the ESTP is worrying that they're irresponsible, worrying that they're not dutiful enough, worrying that they're not doing their job enough. But the thing is that if ESTPs know that they are actively putting in the time and making the villain function an ally to give them those memories or that life experience that they need to be able to develop the wisdom, and that includes failure, by the way, that they allow themselves to fail. And also, by the way, folks, ESTPs need the room to fail, and if you're not giving ESTPs room to fail, you're out of your freaking mind. Because here's the difference. Mistakes and errors, folks. When you make a mistake and you do nothing about it, it becomes an error. Guess what? If you make a mistake and you fix it, it's not an error. It could actually become a success. ESTPs are masters of making a lot of mistakes, like everybody. But they make a lot of mistakes. But they're also the masters of fixing those mistakes super quick. And they need to be given the room to make those mistakes because it's their version of trial and error learning. Because they can learn from everyone else's mistakes, and that's great, but they also need to try it out because they don't know which decision they want to do, so they need to try multiple things, and that's going to cause failure. Take cooking, for example. This is a recipe I've never done before. I'm worried that I'm not going to do it well enough because I lack experience, SI villain, so I don't know if I want to do this, but you know what? F it, I'm just going to try it. And then they try it, and then, oh, it turned out really good. Oh, no, it didn't go good. I knew I did wrong. And do it again later, and it's better because they fixed the mistake. The thing is that the ESTP needs to stop going, allowing the chaotic transition of the paladin to lead them to an area of failure or to not allow them to fail. Because sometimes, an I inferior gets away, and it's like, oh, I'm afraid of failure, so I'm not going to allow myself to fail. Because if I fail, then that's going to take away my freedom of choice. When the reality situation is, in order to protect their freedom of choice, they have to risk losing their freedom of choice for the sake of failure so that they can gain the wisdom necessary for them to continue to guarantee that they have always had freedom of choice. Wow. So logically speaking, it's like, what do you do in that situation? What do you do, right? What do you do as an ESTP? Well, you orderly, and so instead of chaotically, just ignoring the fact that, because chaotically going to your SI villain, that's where you end up having sensual desires and giving yourself over to debauchery at that point, being really emo about it, right? Emo with your INFJ subconscious because it's underdeveloped, but then also with your unconscious, you're like, well, I'm just going to give myself into these sensual things because that's how I'm gonna do the quick route. Do it as doing the expedient thing, right? That's that version of the expedient for the unconscious. And the expedient way is like, well, I'm just going to give into my sensual pleasures because why bother? The INFJ side does it, but so also does the ISTJ. This is what can lend themselves into debauchery, right? And then the INFJ subconscious could lead them down to like lack of self-respect or ultimately pride. And they can get too prideful that they're not willing to change themselves. Whereas the ISTJ unconscious is like, well, I'm just being immature. That's really what it is. And so by maturing their introverted sensing, they become, they have a higher sense of responsibility because the ISTJ, let's be honest, they're overly responsible. So they're trying to develop what responsibility they can within there to gain access to their TE critic. Because remember, the critic function is where wisdom exists. Now people are like, well, wait a minute, Mr. C.S. Joseph, you're talking about wisdom up here in the subconscious, but we all know that wisdom is attached to the TE critic. Yes, I know that. I'm just saying that INFJ subconscious itself, because the INFJ archetype in general is attached to wisdom, that's what it produces. It produces wisdom and improving other human beings through wisdom. But I'm saying a person's personal sense of wisdom is derived from the critic function within the unconscious, which then gives them maturity. It is the source of their maturity, right? Maturity is everything, and that's done through the critic function, right? The critic function does that. So based on that, they need to develop their critic function, and they become wise. And they realize that it's wise to potentially do the research, to potentially master a skill. That way they are always guaranteeing their freedom of choice. So, for example, if an ESTP doesn't, they like cutting class, they love cutting class. They're the one type out of all types that cuts class more than anyone else. They spend all that time cutting class instead of learning about, skills that they may need in school, because all that time they cut in class, they don't get no high school diploma, which means, oh, wait, my choices have been taken away. Oh, maybe I should have gone to class. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm going to go to class now because that way I can protect my freedom of choice. Oh, I have my freedom of choice taken away. So, ESTPs, you don't want your freedom of choice being taken away? Maybe you should spend time being more responsible with certain things, right? Doesn't necessarily mean you're irresponsible people. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that sometimes certain you can make irresponsible decisions. Doesn't necessarily mean you're an irresponsible person. Don't assign yourself the label. You're overgeneralizing, and that too is actually an arrogant point of view. That's actually arrogant. That's pride. When you just label yourself an irresponsible person, you just do, because then it's like you think that your self importance is that high or that low that you can identify with irresponsibility. No, you're just making individual irresponsible choices. The sum of the parts is not equal to the whole, or it's not even greater than the whole. That standpoint, right? You can't do that. You can't have that point of view. That's an expedient point of view. And gosh, there's another point with Jordan Peterson I was going to make specifically for this. By the way, if you're an ESTP, read 12 Rules for Life. An ESTP male, it is absolutely critical as an ESTP male that you read 12 Rules for Life, because Jordan Peterson is absolutely speaking to you. Absolutely speaking to you. I think ESTPs benefit more than anybody else from reading 12 Rules for Life out of all the types. And then, developing the unconscious basically by going into the villain function in an orderly fashion instead of chaotic fashion, which means they're getting over their worry, right? And they're instead of being worried and not giving themselves over to their sensual pleasures, they are being dutiful to themselves and realizing that they are protecting their own future by being more responsible and owning up to their crap. Remember, this is how they're hypocrites. They see everybody else being irresponsible and they call everyone else out on their hypocrisy, but they themselves can't handle it themselves. So as a result of that, they find themselves in a really bad situation. Oh, my freedom of choice is being taken away because I made bad decisions in the past. And then they start to worry that they're going to make those bad decisions again, and then they don't. Because they realize, oh, I had my choice taken away before. I don't want my choice taken away again. So the ESTP will work hard to protect their freedom of choice and surround themselves with people, aka the ESTP wolf pack, who they are strengthening, imparting their wisdom upon, such that all those people will protect the ESTP's freedom of choice as well, right? Because loyal people provide freedom of choice. SI users provide expert intuition, which is the thing that provides freedom of choice. NE gives freedom of choice, and NI takes freedom of choice in exchange for providing comfort. You see the point? It's a trade, folks. It's a trade. So that's how you develop your unconscious. So path to enlightenment, and then which leads to a higher level of maturity. So a mature ESTP who is going through their orderly transition, and the villain is no longer villain function, it is an ally function. So their sense of responsibility is an ally now, and all of a sudden they're actually executing, and they're more responsible, and they are taking care of business and having self-respect. As a result of that, then all of a sudden they end up having all that life experience necessary to protect, because guess what? The ISTJ unconscious is a guardian. It's a protector, and it protects freedom of choice. Their inferior function ends up becoming protected by their developed unconscious, right? And that developed unconscious guarantees that NI inferior will be able to aspire and always have a future. Always have a future. Always have a choice, right? And then it's developed. So, and that leads to the final product of, which is the critic function, which is wisdom. Final product of subconscious is humility. Final product of the ego is responsibility. Final product of the unconscious is wisdom as a result of maturity, right? And they do that by turning the villain function into an ally function. That's the third gateway. And at last, after having the first, second, and third gateway mastered with orderly transition and not chaotic transition, because the chaotic transition of ISTJ unconscious is, hey, I'm going to cut class today, versus, hey, I want to be in class today so that I end up like having a job, bring in money so that I can have freedom of choice. Oh, I guess like that's a thing. That'd be nice. So then you have the three sides of the mind. So you have responsibility, you have humility, and you have wisdom available. And at last, the superego starts respecting the ego after all the work that it's done. And the superego is at last willing to be developed on its own. And ENFP superego is right here. And you go through the demon. What happens when the demon is a chaotic transition? How does that happen? Well, Why does it chaotic transition? It's because the superego does not respect the ego because it doesn't have the humility. It's like you're arrogant, you're prideful, or it doesn't have the wisdom. Wow, you're unwise. And you're irresponsible. I don't care. I'm not going to listen to you. Oh, you're responsible, you're humble, and you're wise? Okay, yeah, I'll work with you now. I'll lend you my power. You just got to earn it. And then all of a sudden you go through the orderly transition of the demon. And you can start turning the superego into an angelic force. Super important. Well, the angelic force, it's a big deal. Let's be straight. It's a very big deal. Well, that angelic force goes even beyond that. The demon function, like when it's a chaotic transition, it's very demonic. It's like doing the deal with the devil is very destructive. And it usually activates via cognitive orbit right here. And you can see the flow of information from the top. Let's take it from the top. Extroverted sensing hero. Oh, I gave you this good experience. I strengthened you. I did this really good thing for you. You benefited, and obviously I didn't benefit from that. I made it a win-lose, and I lost, and that sucks. Screw you, and we're going to have anything to do with you anymore. And then that person responds with, wow, really? And then they take away the ESTP's choice. Ooh, you just took away my choice? Fine. You took away my choice? Then you don't get any choices. You don't get a future. And that SE reacts and hits them so hard that that person is like potentially permanently maimed, so they don't have a future anymore. What's the best example of extrovert intuition demon in pop culture? Well, it's the Saw films. Did you guys know Jigsaw in the Saw films is an ESTP in his superego, in his ENFP superego? Yeah, he's an ESTP. Want to play a game? That's what ENFP demon is all about. You want to play a game? You made the rules. You made the rules, guys. You made the rules. You're not enforcing your own rules, SJs. You're not enforcing your own rules, affiliatives. You're not enforcing your own laws, guys. Oh, King George, you're just putting arbitrary laws. Okay, you want to play a game? You want to play a game, King George? We're going to dress up like Native Americans and throw your tea overboard in protest and make a mockery of you and the British Empire. You want to play a game? Yeah, that's where the Boston Tea Party came from. Thank you, Samuel Adams. Thank you for your creative flair with your ESTP. That's amazing. That's where that came from, folks. That's where that came from. So, you want to play a game? Because the thing is that you're the one that made the rules. And because you made the rules, well, it's poetic justice for you. And justice will be served because you won't have a future or a choice. Because you will be imprisoned. Because you put the ESTP in prison. How dare you? So now the superego, you go through an orderly transition. It turns the demon into an angel, right? And then these functions go in. And then all of a sudden, the FI trickster becomes the FI parent of the superego. Interesting. You know what's really great about trickster functions? Is that when trickster functions, they're the most unaware function in all the function stacks. See, the demon has lower awareness, technically, than the trickster, but the trickster thinks it has awareness, and it's just lying to itself. It's literally lying to itself. It's lying, like the FI trickster is lying to itself, telling me I'm a good person. It's literally lying to itself, because it doesn't even know different. It's so ignorant. It is so ignorant and so unaware. It has no idea. The demon function, it has less awareness, but it's not ignorant about its less awareness. It's like, yeah, I'm aware that I'm not aware, and I'm aware that I don't care. Want to play a game? You know, like that's really where it comes from. You know, it's your choice. You make a choice. Oh, you made that choice. Well, too bad for you. Because you gave me a Xanatos Gambit where every choice you gave me benefited you. So I'm going to give you choices. You made me play a game where you only benefited from it. Well, I'm going to make you play a game now where the only thing you get, no matter what choice you get, you just get death. Want to play a game? So, ENFP superego in its angelic form instead of its demonic form, all of a sudden it's got FI parent. Wait a minute, it's FI parent. What this means is that ENFP superego in its angelic form produces awareness of the absolute good. ESTPs definitely believe in absolute truth, But it's one thing, it's such a mystery that the trickster function can really cause in the angelic form of the superego, can literally cause the ESTP to really understand absolute good. So the most amoral person ends up having the highest understanding of morality with its superego so developed in its angelic form. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. And that is the power of developing the demon function. And it can only be done with all of the other sides of the mind developed, such that you can have an orderly use of the demon function. Such that, what is the orderly use of the demon function? Where the ESTP is going after people saying, want to play a game? So that when the person finishes the game, that person realizes, oh, I created an arbitrary bullshit system that does nothing to harm, and it may benefit me, but it doesn't benefit anyone else. I'm really selfish, you know? And it's like, and the ENFP angel is like, hey, I'm teaching you people to be actually charitable. And ultimately, the ENFP superego is like, I'm going to give you choices that's only going to lead to you learning a lesson you will never forget. Because if you want a future, you better let me have a future. We can both have our own futures, but you better let me have mine. You better make sure that I'm free, because if I'm not free, you're not free. You don't get a choice if I don't get a choice. And the ENFP superego then, if everyone gets a choice, it exists, the angelic form of the demon function, it exists to guarantee freedom of choice for everybody. ENFP superego becomes that advocate for humanity, such that advocate of humanity in its angelic form has the power to potentially advocate for humanity, such that they're basically broken out of hellfire, basically, to advocate for humanity, because it guarantees the future of the human race. Because the ESTP found the path to guarantee its own future, such that it can share that ability with its fellow man, so that they can guarantee their future, so that they can guarantee their freedom of choice, so that they can guarantee their freedom. It's all about freedom, folks. Freedom is everything. Okay? Freedom is everything. Let freedom ring. Thank God Almighty, let freedom ring, right? Well, made possible by ENFP angelic, the angel ENFP within the superego of the ESTP. Their other true hidden purpose. Testing the structural integrity of things to make sure that freedom is always allowed. Because if there is no structural integrity, well, if there's no integrity, well, then there's not going to be any freedom. Because, think about it. If you build your house on a rock, well, then you're going to be okay, and you're going to have a future. You're going to have a freedom of choice if you build your house on a rock. If you build your house upon sand, it's going to get washed away, and there goes your choice with it. And then you're imprisoned with having to build your house over and over and over and over, and it keeps getting washed away because you can't learn the lesson of not building it on the sand because you're too busy doing the expedient instead of the meaningful. And that's the ESTP's job, to point it out that you have those character flaws, you hypocrites. Provided the ESTP is not being irresponsible and is being a hypocrite themselves. Provided that's not happening. So, folks, that's how you improve the gateways. You improve the gateways, remember, hero function, first gateway, but it's ultimately to provide order for the rest of the system. This is a system, the system of the mind, the system of the soul with ESTPs. Then you have NI inferior, where it's afraid of what it wants, afraid of losing its freedom of choice, afraid of making the wrong choice. Then it aspires and is secure and being like, I actually know what I want now. And I want to gain wisdom, and I want to help people. I want to show them a different way, show them something different. And then there's the fifth gateway, where they finally realize that being responsible protects their freedom of choice later. And then they become wiser as a result of that. And then they gain experience and knowledge, maybe even to the point of becoming like a scholar or an academic or a powerful autodidact or a powerful master, and achieve mastery in something, because that mastery will always guarantee their freedom of choice. And then as a result of that, they gain the ability to have an ally, so that they see responsibility not as something that hampers them down. They don't see responsibility as a prison, but they see it as an ally to protect their freedom of choice. And then their extrovert intuition demon, such that they actually end up becoming the advocate of humanity, or they end up protecting everyone's future because they figured out how to protect their own future. And they share that with everybody else. Such is the way of the enlightened and integrated ESTP. And that, my friends, is how to cognitively develop an ESTP, to gain responsibility, humility, wisdom, and ultimately love for their fellow man by protecting their future and always guaranteeing that there will be freedom for humanity. If you found this lecture useful, helpful, educational, thank you so much for subscribing and liking and commenting and just being part of this community, folks. Couldn't do it without you. I literally took a leap of faith and I quit my job. I am completely beholden to this community now, and we're making steps. Hopefully you could see like concrete evidence of that, but we're going all the way. I am not giving up. And if that means I have to be broadcasting out of a van on the street because I'm homeless, so be it. But I'm going to definitely make sure that that doesn't happen again. And but regardless, folks, couldn't do this without you. Thank you so much, and thank you for this opportunity. This is an hour-and-a-half lecture, definitely not intended to be, but there's just so much here, and I really wanted the opportunity to show it to you folks. So thank you for your time, and I'll see you guys very soon. So have a good night.